Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and Theresa May has put her deal up for a third time before Parliament on the day when it had to be passed, otherwise we get no extension beyond the 12th of April. Now, I discussed yesterday how irresponsible it was of the Prime Minister to detach the withdrawal agreement from the political declaration, which is what she's done, as it's a breach of UK law, though it's perfectly legal in international terms, and that's why she's done it. So after months of wondering what her inexplicable actions meant, was she moving towards a no deal in order to save her party? Was she making Brexit impossible so we'd cancel it altogether? Well, actually, neither, it seems. She actually was genuinely trying to get her deal through for a form of Brexit with no end goal in sight. So we'd be out of the EU with no path to follow for the future. And so desperate was she to get the deal through that she attempted to break the law. I mean, to begin with, she didn't even want to give Parliament a vote on the deal at all, but the courts ruled that that was illegal. She would also have been facing court action had this agreement been approved by Parliament as well, but, it wasn't. It had an improved 286 votes in favour of it, but 344 against. A margin of 58, with 34 of her own MPs voting against it, which is a lot less than last time, but still too large to overcome. Now, it's also the 17th time that Theresa May has been defeated as Prime Minister over Brexit. Like I say, she doesn't know when to give in, which is normally an admirable trait. In the same vein as Robert the Bruce. If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. But I mean, this is beyond all reason. Anyway, there's a lot of people who will say that we should cut her some slack because she faced an impossible task. But she didn't. Brexit was always going to be divisive, of course, and it may well have been impossible. But it should have been obvious that the same weakness that resulted in David Cameron issuing the referendum in the first place was not going to work for the next stage. Every step towards Brexit that the Prime Minister took was always going to split her party, as indeed it did. She should have faced down the minority of hardliners in her party, appointed only the most able as ministers, regardless of whether they supported Remain or Leave, sacked them when they stepped out of line, and only allowed legal options for votes in Parliament. In other words, she should have been a strong leader, not a weak enabler of the ERG. Now, I'm not saying that this approach definitely would have worked, but it was the only way she had any chance at all of making it work. But the bottom line is she had no long-term plan, she had no alternative short-term plan, and she had no authority in her own party. She was elected simply because everyone else backed away. She was a Remainer who championed Brexit and therefore was seen as a compromise candidate. Or at least that's the kind way of putting it. Another way of putting it is that she was weak and both sides thought they could manipulate her. The Brexiteers at least were correct. Jeremy Corbyn summed up by saying that if the vote was defeated, this was before the vote took place, and the government won't get behind another referendum, then he sees a general election as the only option. Interestingly, before the vote, ministers were saying that this is Parliament's last chance to secure Brexit. So, good news, Jeremy. It looks like the government are going to get behind another referendum, as it has actually failed. To do otherwise would mean that they've lied in Parliament. But one phrase did concern me. Jeremy Corbyn said of the general election prospect. See no alternative other than having a general election to decide who rules this country in the future. And I thought, rules this country? What an awful phrase. I really wish he hadn't said that. A Prime Minister, and indeed any MP, whether a member of the government or not, is a servant of this country, not a ruler. Lead, yes. Rule, no. But aside from those poorly chosen words, with the vote failed, the government have to do something. Even if Theresa May is actually prepared to take us out with no deal, she can't officially take that position. She has to come back with a proposal. She will whinge and moan about how Labour have stuffed her, but once she's finished ranting, she'd have to say what the government intends, and it looks like she has done that. That's her legal duty. She'll either have to get the government behind a way forward, such as a referendum, or call a general election herself and then resign, as she promised she would for the next general election. It'd be less ignominious than suffering another vote of confidence that could well go against her this time. The ERG may well be ready to pull the trigger on her if she doesn't go willingly. The deputy leader of this vile group stood up in the Commons today and said that she should step down as she promised. But of course, she only promised to step down if her deal went through, and it did not. But it would have done if every single Tory MP had voted for it. They didn't need the DUP. The Prime Minister did actually suggest before the vote that if it were close, she might try again. But not only would that fall foul, of course, of the not substantially changed motion rule, but the EU said that in order for us to get our extension up to the 22nd of May, then the deal had to be voted by the end of today. Not 12th of April, today. And that has not happened. They'd have to go against their own decision, and they well know the dangers of doing that. So my fear is that Theresa May will say the deal was a lot closer and she intends to go to the council and argue for another chance to pass the deal, running the clock right down until the council refuses and we crash out. She'll then blame Labour and the EU for it, but the people will know whose fault it is. At least a majority will. In other news, Michel Barnier said that he'd be ready to discuss a permanent customs union if that's what the UK wants. Now, I'm not sure how to read statements like that. They really do seem to be bending over backwards to help us leave with the deal. Now, is it just because they don't want to intervene in another country's politics, or because they'd actually at this point prefer us to leave, but they obviously don't want us to leave with no deal? Either way, it leaves the government open to supporting the Common Market 2.0 proposal if they really want Brexit to happen. However, Number 10 have been saying that Theresa May intends to put her deal up for yet another vote. I mean, the EU Council have said no to this. They said if it's not passed on the 29th of March, that's it. And it's not going to pass. She got it a lot closer, a lot more buckled, but she's still not going to get enough. Absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, once the result was confirmed, Donald Tusk, he said that he'd be calling an emergency summit of the EU Council on April the 10th. Now, that's 2 days before we're due to crash out. This will be time for us to say that we'll take part in the European elections and would like to behave ourselves now. Unfortunately, Theresa May does not seem to be taking that line. So we can only hope. But it certainly seems like May is going to have to troop along to yet another EU Council meeting, deliver a speech to them, and then leave the room and stand outside like a naughty schoolgirl. I only wonder if this process has somehow desensitised her to humiliation. On Monday, Parliament debates again how it wishes to proceed. Hopefully it'll do better this time. 500,000 people marched to get us away from Brexit in October. 1 million or more did so last weekend, and 6 million have signed a petition to do so in some form or other. So the tide should be well and truly turning here if only the government would pay attention to it. And I'll have to close with some words from a Nobel laureate. Admit that the waters around you have grown and accept that it's soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone.
Oh, the times they are a-changin'.